Hello, everybody. We will start in a couple of minutes. Thank you for being here. Hello, Bea. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here now.
Great. I see you. Hello.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello. Good to see you.
Fantastic. Let me just confirm with Tati if all is fine online. I think we are broadcasting. Tati, if
yes, I'm here now. I hear some people talking.
Okay. Hello, everybody. We will.
Sounds like you.
I had the page open. Okay. Great. We're all set, Bea, for to start at any time.
So we're all ready. Good.
Sure. Yes.
Okay, so welcome everyone to this webinar. We're really excited to talk to you today about what it's important to know and do and study and learn if you're someone who wants to use the Enneagram in your professional practice in any way. And you could be someone who is already a therapist or a coach or a spiritual director or an organization development consultant, or someone who wants to get into that, one of those fields in order to use the Enneagram. We're just really pleased to be able to share our experience today and some of what we think is really important to do if you want to do this work well, because the Enneagram is a really powerful tool. But because it's so powerful and it can be such an effective tool, it's really important to know how to use it well and what that means. And it's interesting, as Uranio and I were talking today about what we were going to talk about today, I noticed myself getting more and more excited about talking about this. At first, it seemed a little bit like a little dry, like, how to use the Enneagram as a professional. But as we really started talking about what we wanted to share with you about this today, I started to really get connected with how important this work is to me, how much I love doing it, how honored I am to work with the Enneagram and to work with people using the Enneagram. And so I just really appreciate your interest in this, whether it's for your own personal growth or whether it's supporting others' growth. And really thank you for joining us and spending some time to really listen to what we think about what's important to do when you want to use this amazing tool, the Enneagram map in your professional life.
Right. Likewise, I am super excited for all the reasons you mentioned and for a few others. Bea, I think that something that really draws my attention is whenever I have an opportunity to share my view and our view on what is the right Enneagram theory, the right Enneagram approach, the ways that practitioners can not only do a better job with their clients, but also honor the Enneagram system in its depth and also in taking the right theory in.
Yeah. So because I'm self-preservation dominant, I'd like to give you a little overview of what we'll be covering in the next 2 hours, just so you can follow along the outline. And then I think we'll get started. So First, Uranio and I are going to share a little bit about our own personal journeys using the Enneagram as professionals. And then we're going to talk about what we think. We're going to kind of give you a list of what we think everyone who wants to use the Enneagram in a high quality way, in an effective way as a practitioner, needs to know how to do. So we'll talk about the different elements. So you can create a to-do list if you're learning how to use the Enneagram as a practitioner. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we teach those things that we think you need to learn in our professional programs. So this is a little bit, of course, to let you know about our school and how we train professionals in using the Enneagram based on what we think is important. But hopefully you'll also get a window into exactly how we go about teaching these things and some of the tools we use, some of the methods we use, both teaching methods and teaching tools, but also Enneagram methods for you to use potentially when you use the Enneagram in your professional practice. So that's going to be the first hour and a little bit. And then we're going to bring in one of the students that's gone through our program. And our program consists of 2 different professional workshops plus an inner work retreat, and then integration work in between. So it's a whole process. And we're going to bring on a good friend and student of ours, Teresa McBean, and she's going to talk a little bit about what she does with the Enneagram. So you have another example other than the examples we'll provide from our own experience. You'll have an experience, you'll have some sort of eyewitness testimony, personal testimony from someone who's been through our program and someone who is using it in her professional practice. But even more than that, one of the things we'll be talking about is how we teach people how to do a specific Enneagram typing interview. And Teresa's done over 150, and she's probably done even more now, typing interviews since she took our course where we train in that method. And so she has, I think, a lot of things to say that you'll be very interested in hearing about. And she's a wonderful person. So we're really looking forward to having her on in the second hour.
Right. So are you asking me to start with my introduction?
I am, yes. Tell us a little bit, Uranio, about your experience. And I'm thinking, let's talk a little bit about what our experience has been using the Enneagram as a practitioner, what our trajectory has been in learning, and especially lessons learned about what kinds of things you need to be able to learn to do well, or some important tips about what it's good to remember to incorporate as you go on your own professional development journey.
Okay, so I am a Brazilian, and I first heard about the Enneagram in 1996. I lived in São Paulo, Brazil, up to 5 years ago, and then I moved with my family to London, where I am right now. So in 1996, I was training people, actually healthcare professionals in Rio de Janeiro, not my hometown, but a very well-known city. And I was talking about similar subjects, and a student of mine mentioned the Enneagram, and I had never heard about it. And that student gave me a lift to my hotel. It was raining, and she started talking to me, and I could immediately grasped that I could be a 5 on the Enneagram. And I got interested enough to go for a book. I read Helen Palmer's book at that time. And all of a sudden, I was doing courses in Brazil, like as a student, reading all I could about the Enneagram. And I spent 5 years studying it very much, very hard. And then after 5 years, I started getting some opportunities that I would then say yes, despite my 5-ness, like teaching in universities and starting doing corporate work with the Enneagram. And that remains to these days. But when I was in Brazil, that was more frequent. Doing corporate work with the Enneagram. The end result was I I ended up teaching the Enneagram in business for over 16,000 people, both in trainings, lots of trainings, and coaching, but also consultancy like change management or organizational development with the Enneagram. My background is in business, both graduation and masters, and I've always working as an organizational consultant even before the Enneagram. So that became very intense. But with time, because of my own personal process, I decided to do more public workshops. And each year, they were becoming deeper and deeper and deeper, integrating a lot of transformational work. And that is because together with the Enneagram in 1996, I started my inner growth path in wisdom schools, traditions, and I spent in 3 different schools, I spent 24 years, 25 years, never been out of one path. And a few resources started opening up for me, including intuition, a lot of energy work. And then my workshops got very different. And I decided to do more of this work than the corporate work. Although right now, for instance, during COVID, I am doing corporate work, for instance, with Unilever in Brazil, and many big companies, both multinationals and Brazilian and Latin American, that I have helped with the Enneagram. Is this what you expected from me, Bea, as an intro?
Yes, I think so. Although, would you end by adding any kind of key lessons that you learned doing the professional Enneagram work you did along the way that people might find useful or interesting?
Right. So first lesson I learned, the concerns of people in business with what is the Enneagram, where does it come from? The concerns that people have are not as big as most practitioners have. So practitioners are a bit apologetic when they take that to businesses and to other professional environments, but people aren't. So it's a myth that people are not ready or they are resistant. And actually, sometimes we develop some kind of prejudice that as if those people, for any reason, were not open. So that was one. And another one was we can and should do a mix of applications in some business theme or some competence that people are trying to develop in the company. But we should and can also do a little bit of pure Enneagram work first, with people self-disclosing a little bit, with all the necessary protection and approach. But yes, we can do deep work. And one last thing, newer generations don't want more of the same at all. They don't want just a superficial tool. They want something like the Enneagram that can really transform.
Beautiful. Thank you, Uranio. My path was a little bit different. So I learned the Enneagram in 1990 from David Daniels, who some of you may have heard of. He started one of the first Enneagram schools in the United States with Helen Palmer. And I knew him personally. His son, one of his sons was one of my best friends. And so I learned the Enneagram from him, and I immediately loved it. It really shocked me how much it told me about myself and how accurate how accurate it was and how deep it was. And so I was hooked really from the beginning. And then I was about to move back to Chicago from San Francisco, where I live, to go to graduate school. And it happened that one of my cousins, my father's from Chicago, one of my cousins was really into the Enneagram and even into the esoteric knowledge behind the Enneagram. So he introduced me to Gurdjieff, who's sort of one of the esoteric sort of spiritual teaching, psycho-spiritual teaching behind the Enneagram. And we talked Enneagram a lot. So my interest grew. And when I came back to California in 1994, I decided to go through the narrative tradition training. And I did that, and I got into therapy for the first time, and I was looking at myself as a 2, and I learned so much about myself, and it really informed my therapy so well, knowing I was a 2 and observing all the things I observed in myself about being a 2. It was really like, it just revolutionized my growth journey. I hadn't really been on a conscious growth journey before the Enneagram. And during the course of my therapy, my therapist helped me realize that I really didn't want to be an academic. I wanted to go back to school to become a psychotherapist. So I went back to school to get a master's in psychotherapy. And it was so amazing because I looked at every single theory and thing I learned in graduate school to become a therapist through the lens of the Enneagram. To me, the Enneagram was like a master theory, through which you could learn different things in terms of how they related to the Enneagram. So from day one, being a psychotherapist, I thought with the Enneagram. I saw the human journey of healing through the lens of the Enneagram. To me, it gave a map that was so robust and so helpful, especially in helping my clients get to the heart of the matter very quickly. So, and I remember thinking when I was doing my internship as a therapist, like, how does anyone do therapy without the Enneagram? Because for me, I could hear my clients, and I think one of the things you have to really do as a practitioner is listen really well to whoever you're working with, in terms of listening for what do they need, what is the challenge, what's the area of growth that needs to be addressed, and we'll talk more about that later. But it helped me get right to the heart of the matter. Now, even if I didn't always know someone's type right away, it still gave me ideas about what to try or how to start to conceptualize what was happening. And again, sometimes it's trial and error with people, but it gave me an amazing tool that helped me. Because let's face it, when you're a therapist in those early years, it's really challenging. It's vulnerable because people are coming to you for help. And it's like you just started yesterday learning how to help people. And the Enneagram helped me so much by giving me a lens through which I could learn about what people's patterns were and how people got stuck and what they needed to grow. So then I also got really into group work because in my practicum, we did a form of group work that was really compelling for me. So I trained in group facilitation training at Stanford Business School because they were doing that same kind of group process. It's called T group, and it's basically it's a learning group where you learn about yourself and others through talking and not having an agenda of any kind. So I learned to be a group facilitator at Stanford Business School, and I loved the process of helping business people, MBA students at that point, learn how to understand themselves more and how to develop self-awareness and emotional intelligence such that they could be better in whatever work they were doing. And to see people like totally get it, how important understanding yourself and others is to anything you might do in life. Seeing the impact of helping people increase their emotional intelligence was really powerful for me. So from the time I did that, I was really kind of on a path of, I was a psychotherapist for about 20 years and used the Enneagram every day of my life as a therapist, sometimes just in my head implicitly, sometimes explicitly with my clients who knew about the Enneagram or who I would introduce it to, and they would get really into it. But in addition to being a psychotherapist, I gradually moved more and more to working with leaders and teams also. And I still do a lot of that now. I don't work as a psychotherapist anymore because it's hard with my travel schedule and our work schedule at Chestnut Pius Enneagram Academy. But I'm still always learning better and better ways to introduce people, and especially in the business setting, they really need it so much. Introduce people to the Enneagram as a way of quickly and efficiently knowing themselves better, managing themselves better, and having better working relationships, team cohesion, and really even organizational culture sometimes, through the deep wisdom that the Enneagram brings, and bringing it to them in ways that are accessible, that people can immediately understand the efficacy of it. And of course, along with Uranio, we do a lot of workshops and retreats, which I love and has become even more the focal point for me. But I still work with teams and leaders, and sometimes I coach some individuals. It's the people are endlessly fascinating to me, and the Enneagram is endlessly helpful in all the ways that it helps me help people, and helps me help people learn to help themselves, because it's definitely a teach a person to fish kind of thing. You know, the saying, give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, teach a person to fish, they'll eat for a lifetime. And it's definitely helping people understand how to use self-observation, and something like the Enneagram as a guide for deepening their self-knowledge, to the point where they live a happier life, have better relationships, and can be more conscious in whatever it is they're doing.
And we met at the International Enneagram Association in conferences, and then we were together at the board, where both you and I were presidents. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think this is a good moment to start saying what we consider to be important for practitioners to know, and to know how to do, in order to provide a high quality Enneagram based work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. So as many of you know, finding someone's correct type can be a challenging process, both for the person and for the practitioner who might be wanting to use the Enneagram. It's like, that's the entry point. When people find their type in a way that really lands for them, it's like the whole Enneagram opens up in a very powerful way. Before that, it can be hard to really get a clear sense of what it can do for you. So typing is the first thing. You need to know as a practitioner, how to help guide people, because you don't want to figure it out for them or tell them what type they are, but how to guide people in the process, and even see it as the first stage of a self-discovery process, how to help them find their correct type and subtype.
Right. Another thing that is quite important for me, there are two stages that practitioners go through when using the Enneagram with clients. The first stage is, here's some Enneagram information. I think you might be this type, and have a look at this. What do you think? And, engage in inquiry methods like, how do you think this connects to what's happening with you? Or, but that is very good, already very nice, but it's not very sophisticated yet. And, there is something that all practitioners can learn how to do, which is assess what is the actual problem the client has through the lenses of the Enneagram. Meaning that the Enneagram can be used as an assessment tool, not only for typing, but for understanding where a particular client's problem is coming from in the psyche map of that particular Enneagram type. So is it something coming from the emotional pattern that is limiting, like the passion, or from a mental pattern that is limiting, which we call fixation? Or is it more a manifestation of the client's subtype? Or is it more the instinctual sequence, or the dominant or the repressed instinct, as we call it? Or is there a trauma there? So we ended up creating a list of assessment factors. We'll talk about it a bit later. And to me, it's super useful when Enneagram practitioners know the theory well, to identify the multiple things that can be happening, and then know for each client which of these factors should be addressed first as a priority. Because while there are always many things happening with the client, there is always also one that if we work on will generate the best results, will really help the client get better in whatever we are trying to get better in a shortcut. So that competency to me is what means to be a senior Enneagram practitioner.
Right. This is really important. And I think it's like right after you kind of figure out type and subtype, to me, this involves listening a lot to the person you're working with, asking questions, being curious, and having a really open mind. And so maybe you find out, they're a type 1. Well, don't start assuming you know what all their issues are, right? Or don't start assuming that there's one cookie cutter way to work with a 1, right? So what I often do is I ask, what's going on right now? What's challenging? Why are you seeking help from a therapist or a coach, or if they're on a team, what do you think you bring to this team that's really positive? And what do you think is an area of development? So listening and asking questions and really, really hearing what does this person, feel good about? What are they what have they developed already that's very positive? And sometimes it's good to mirror that back to the person. Like if you know the Enneagram and you're hearing from a 1 and that they've worked on already kind of trying to be less self-critical, okay, this is a person who's already been doing some work. So you're listening for all kinds of things after you kind of figure out the type and the subtype. So it's listening and then connecting what you hear, what the person is bringing to your knowledge of the different components of the Enneagram that you can deploy in helping that person grow. And so it's sort of like, what does this person need right now where they are? Where have they been? Where do they want to go? What's challenging? And how can I bring my expertise about the Enneagram to bear?
Yeah. On top of that, it's important to know a certain hierarchy of factors involved in change, and to know where the client is and what the client can bear in terms of change. So it's super important also to know things like levels of awareness, both in general and per type. And that is included in our methodology of assessment, as we are talking about. But also, it's important to know how to work on each problem. Not only assess the problem, but know how to work. So for instance, if you get to a conclusion that one client's problem is coming from the passion, you need to know how to work on that emotionally. And there are very specific things to be done, including helping the person get more frustrated at the passion. That is how we work on it. Now, if it's a mental thing, you need to work on mental paradigms. You need to break limiting beliefs. You need to use completely different techniques. Or if it's an instinct issue, then there are other ways. We sometimes talk about taming a wild dog that the person has inside, because all of us have this animal side of us. So knowing what the problem is super important, but it's not enough, because we need to know how to work on each of those problems.
Yes. And it's exactly that. It's embedding a knowledge of the Enneagram into your work in such a way where you understand what the priorities are and you might hear, oh, this person could benefit from seeing this particular subtype pattern that it seems like they're unaware of right now, but they could really benefit from being more aware of that. Now, connected to this, we present a levels of awareness model. And this is a really important element of the Enneagram, of using the Enneagram, especially because sometimes we can, without realizing it, get fixed ideas about types that inadvertently make us not see how someone exactly needs to make progress, or not see the progress they've already made. So for instance, you may, have a 7 client who's kind of in touch with their pain, who isn't really running away from it anymore, the way 7s can do. And, you might be tempted to say, well, maybe this isn't a 7 because they're talking to me about grief or something, but maybe that person has had something in their life that happened to them that has shifted them. Maybe they did a lot of work in therapy at one point. Maybe there's something going on where that person has achieved a slightly higher level of awareness, and we grow and change. I mean, that's the Enneagram is all about growth and transformation. And so we can sometimes, I think, hold people back by not having an expansive enough vision for what's possible for them. And our levels of awareness model is very, very thoroughly articulated in terms of what a person looks like at each level. And by the way, this level of awareness model is crafted on the Enneagram itself as a process model of change or transformation or perpetual motion. So using the Enneagram diagram and all the wisdom that it comes with as the basis for our levels of awareness model, we talk about at each level, at each of 4 or 5 levels, what is the person like in different dimensions, in different ways, in things that you can observe when you're working with a client. And what do they need to do at each stage to move forward? And it's a list of very specific tasks. So it's almost like you get this really clear workbook or map or checklist to use when you're working with people to help them move the needle, to help them go from one level of awareness to a higher level of awareness. And that's what the Enneagram is all about. So we need to have that vertical model when we're working with the Enneagram, because knowing about the 9 types is not enough, although it's very, very important. But that's just the horizontal. That's the way that we have these 9 types that are completely equal in having strengths and capacities, but also challenges, areas of growth, needing to face blind spots. But there's a specific order that they often need to do things in. And it's good for you to be able to be noticing and listening for, where is this person in their development, and what exactly do I need to suggest or offer or help that person do, depending on where they are.
Right. And then we had a challenge. How can we teach all of this to our students? Because you and I knew how to do it, but it's not always easy to teach. So we came up with case studies connected to each of those assessment factors, including the levels in all of them. And students work together, discussing, and then they have our input, and then they review. So we were concerned with creating proper adult learning methodologies in our courses, and I think I was very happy to do that. And then also how to explain Enneagram theory in the best way, in a way that goes straight to the point. It's easy enough, but also honors the Enneagram's complexity. So we came up with ways of explaining the centers, also the main things for each Enneagram type, basically discerning between what was key and what was not key. Because, for instance, not all ones are perfectionists, and that might not even be the most important thing about ones. Twos are not about helping, actually. They are more about being liked. and not all threes like to be on the stage, on the spotlight. So there was a lot of stereotyping out there and a lot of confusion when it talks about when it comes to types. And I don't need to say more because all of you guys go to Facebook or other platforms and see that the quality of Enneagram discussions is very inconsistent. Now, also, we have this approach that you, Bea, helped spread on the subtypes that for us changes everything. It changes what we suggest that each client does. So a certain 4, according to subtype, needs to stop complaining, moaning, but another 4 needs to start complaining more because, you know, it's another subtype. Or a 7 that has no empathy and tends to be opportunistic, and another 7 who looks at other people first and need to be even a bit more selfish. So if we don't take in subtype theory, we might do something wrong with the students. But subtype alone is not enough because we need to understand about instincts also. And by the way, we don't like also when people teach instincts apart from subtypes because these are two different things, right? And growth pathways, there are 27. And also there are way more than this if you consider the different levels of awareness that Bea talked about. And within type, there are the movements to arrows, to wings, and we are also a bit critical of how wings and arrows have been taken historically by Enneagram teachers and schools. We see those more as growth paths, possible growth paths, and not much about give me more nuances on how I behave. You know, we don't think that actually the Enneagram is a theory of behavioral traits. It's a theory of deeper motivation, unconscious motivation, and most of all, a map of transformation. So wings and arrows can help us on that, and more. So I think we've been for years refining the way we teach all of this in ways that can be absorbed by the students, and when it comes to professional workshops, ways that practitioners can take in and apply.
Right. And as an example of that, and by the way, we're going to talk a little bit more about the typing process because I know we named that and we didn't go too deeply into it, but we're going to talk more about how we teach effective typing. But I want to just refer to what Uranio just said, and that is in one of our courses called Developing Powerful Enneagram Skills, we focus on helping you develop a more thorough, deeper knowledge of some of the basic elements of the Enneagram and how to work with people around them. And I have to tell you, when we first started teaching this, I think I was learning the most of anyone in the room because Uranio was particularly brilliant at helping us understand how the work is different if someone is a heart type, a head type, or a body-based type. Even how you sit in the chair as a practitioner, you know, the way, whether you face the person or you're kind of at an angle, the kind of language you use, there's all kinds of things that you do when you're working with someone that can enhance your connection with that person if you have in mind the 3 different centers of intelligence, and that people who are based in one of those centers or another and overuse that center, they can need a different kind of thing from you as a practitioner when you try to create rapport with them. So understanding the nuances of how to work with people from different levels of intelligence different centers of intelligence is hugely important. You know, like learning that heart types really need you to understand them. They need mirroring sometimes. These specifics that go along with the centers is really, really key. And then how do you work with the types? How exactly, you can think, okay, I know what a 5 is, but do you know exactly, how to work with them when you get in the room with them? Do you know exactly what's going to motivate them, what's going to turn them off? And we talk about do's and don'ts when working with people of each type. We also talk about traps for the practitioner, which it's one of the things we teach that I like the most. Sort of, if you don't really know any better, if you start working with a 9, for instance, one trap that a practitioner can experience with a 9 is when the 9 turns to you at one point after talking about how they may be confused about something or they're having an issue in their life and they don't know what to do. And then they look at you and they say, what do you think I should do? Right? If the 9 asks you as a practitioner, you tell me what to do because I don't know and I can't figure it out. And if you tell them, you have failed the test. That things are going to go downhill from there, right? Because even though 9s struggle sometimes to know what they want because of sloth, they aren't able to access their own inner experience as clearly as they are able to feel into what's going on in the environment around them. Sometimes they don't know what they want, and helping guide a 9 in that process of getting more in touch with themselves and learning more about what they truly want is an important, delicate process. But if you get frustrated with them not knowing and you think, well, this is what they should do, and they ask you what they should do and you tell them, that's a really quick way to alienate a 9. And of course, 9s don't do it to set you up or anything. It's just that sometimes it just seems easier to ask somebody else what they think or how they feel. But that's you're failing the 9 as a practitioner if you're filling in the blanks for them and not just getting instead really interested in what they really think and feel, and having a sense that they know they do have a preference, that they just may have access to it temporarily blocked. And it's just a matter of working with it so that the 9 can on their own come to a deeper understanding of what they want.
Yeah, and what's very interesting also is that works for 9s, but doesn't work for several other types. Like if you're working with an 8, or even with some head types, and you are using that conventional method, both in coaching and in therapy, of inquiring, asking questions more than anything, you'll lose the client. If you don't offer at times a few opinions and solutions, and if you don't go straight to the point, you lose the person. So the thing is, it's a bit dangerous to make any method generic, like trying to use any method with all sorts of people. So with a correct understanding of how types work, what they like, what they don't like, what pushes their buttons, bad experiences they had already in therapy, in coaching, as clients. If we learn all that, then we'll be able to do things much more correctly. Because let's be very sincere here. Before you and I started speaking and working together, even you and I, who knew a lot about the Enneagram, you would make lots of mistakes with your head type clients, and I would do lots of mistakes with my heart type clients.
Absolutely. When we started teaching together, and you taught me so much about 5s and what they need when they're, working with someone, I remember realizing, no wonder I never had very many 5 clients. No wonder all my clients were 2s and 4s. No wonder those 8s never really stayed very long, because I think there was a way that I kept doing. I was acting as a therapist in my style, and I was expecting that everyone else would either have my style or my style would work with them. After I'm a 2, I'm good at relationship and making connections. I'll kind of go meet you halfway or more than halfway. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is to understand your own personality, the one you're bringing to that relationship, but also make a lot of room for how the other person is different and how they might needs someone different. I know that one of my good therapist friends is a 4, and she came to one of our trainings and learned all this new information about how to work with 5s from Uranio, from the expert. And she walked away saying, wow, I've been doing everything wrong. And now it's going to be a whole new day in terms of how I work with 5s. And even if you're an experienced practitioner and you've been working with clients with the Enneagram, sometimes like there's that one, like, oh, it's hard for me to understand how to help 6s, or it's hard for me to understand how to really hold and get through to 8s in a way that helps them grow. So it's almost like it helps you look at what you still need to develop as a professional. And we give you opportunities to go much more deeply into that practitioner relationship and how you really need to master what type patterns are important, what subtype patterns are important, what childhood patterns are important. In our Developing Powerful Enneagram Skills workshop, we talk a lot about I go into my integration of the Enneagram types and object relations theory, which is really interesting and complex. And what I focus on when I apply object relations theory and link it up with the Enneagram is the core needs of each type in childhood, and how when those needs don't get met, which they inevitably don't, because we have a strong need for something and it's hard for parents to meet our needs perfectly, how kind of certain tensions in early childhood development of needs that need to get met that don't get met perfectly lead to the main themes that as adults our clients bring to us as practitioners. And so how to understand the childhood roots of those themes according to what those people needed that maybe they didn't get enough of, or developmental transition points that are crucially important for some types more than others, and what can go wrong and what can lead to having difficulties. So for instance, body types need a kind of psychological holding to help them negotiate the transition between being in union with the mother and being a separate individual child. Head types need a sense of safety. They need to be able to feel protected and safe in the world as they go out and test. Heart types need mirroring. They need to know that they can negotiate that tension between attachment, being connected to important others, and authenticity, being able to be who they really are, that they can negotiate that tension. But sometimes heart types get the message, it's not okay to be just how you are authentically. You need to be what I want you to be or what I need you to be. And so it sets up this sense of sort of focusing more on image or focusing more on others or relationships in certain ways. So we go really deeply into understanding the types. And of course, we always talk about subtypes, but then you also need to understand the passions and the fixations and the instincts, as well as the subtypes, but also embedded in the subtypes, and how to work with even the whole instinctual sequence, how to understand what it means if someone has a social instinct that's repressed. And what kinds of things to do, but especially the order of things to do. Because as you're hearing, there's an abundance of things to work with when you're using the Enneagram as a tool. But sometimes it's a matter of, in that assessment process of hearing the client and matching up what the Enneagram can do for them to what they need, it's very important to sometimes prioritize. Where is this person? What's going to help them most right now? And once we do that work, what's going to help them next? So these are different ways that we provide what people might need as practitioners to really understand the Enneagram at a deeper level so they can apply it.
Yeah. So just to be a bit more illustrative and practical, when it comes, for instance, to typing interviews, one of the things that we have developed is something like this. It's a flow chart that our students use to do a better typing interview. And this flow chart maps out the questions to be asked that are ideal, because many people test type in ways that are not ideal at all. I hear so many times, and I think that you hear even more, be students who have been mistyped or who are in doubt between two or three types because they have been told something that was a stereotype and something that doesn't define that the person is of that X type. And so you need to know what to ask, what to go look for, and also how people respond depending on what type they are. And also in this flow chart, we talk about communication styles for you to observe in an interviewee. Also lookalike types, so that you know that if you're leaning towards one type, you might be wrong because there is a lookalike such and such. And then you need to know how to compare different types. If you're an adult between two or three, you need to ask the right thing that differentiates between those. And then we in our typing interview method that we teach, we thought that it was super important to add the subtype dimension for the person to find out subtype and not only type, for two reasons. If we don't consider that, we get type wrong many times. And also, if we don't talk about that, we will say things to the person that are a bit too generic, and we won't go straight to some points. So together with a good introduction, a good end, our students are now capable of doing typing interviews in 45 to 60 minutes, and with an authoritative method. Right. But that's just one thing. Maybe, yeah, you could talk a bit more about other things.
So we have a unit in our providing effective Enneagram solutions course. So we have our skills course and our solutions course. Our skills course focuses much more on what we just talked about, learning how to work with the different people of different centers of intelligence. So in other words, when you work with an 8, a body type, you need to be grounded in yourself. You need to sit in a way that's grounded. You need to help them feel you. You need to recognize that it's important to talk about experience, not just feelings and beliefs, things like that. Then you need to understand how to help them type themselves. So what do we do? Well, we talk a lot about the typing process. We talk about how to utilize tests. Now, tests, sometimes someone will come to you and they've already taken a test or they've taken 3 tests. So how to embed tests in your typing process. Because what we try to teach people is that tests are fine to take, but they're only one piece of data. Because people can tend to want to take a test and get the answer about themselves from the test or give too much authority to the test. And so it's like helping people hold test results lightly. But also, of course, you're going to be getting your own sense of the person. But we provide a typing interview script. So we suggest that even if someone's taken a test, it's good to either do some sort of conversation or debrief where you validate that type, the type that the test got or not, or don't share the test information with your client, but do a typing interview. And we provide a script based on questions that we've been developing over 20 years. According to sort of what we think are the most powerful questions to differentiate people. So 4s tend to answer this, and this is a good question to ask a 4. This is a good question to ask to find out if they're a 3. And we also provide some information about how different types tend to answer the same question. So you can start to develop your own facility with giving a typing interview. But to save you time, so you don't have to go from scratch when you're doing a typing interview, we give you an interview script. Now, you can shift and change that as you want. You can make that your own and learn over time what works for you. But we give you something to go on, and we talk a lot about things like asking follow-up questions. What kinds of follow-up questions? Now, sometimes as a professional, you may sort of get an idea about what that person's type is early on. Now, it's good for you to consider any ideas you have or impressions you're getting, but it's always really important to also hold those lightly, because sometimes what happens is we kind of see certain aspects of the person and we think that's what the type they are, but upon deeper study, we realize, no, they're actually a different type that looks like that type, but isn't that type. So we need to be really careful about steering people or directing people to the type we think they might be. And we need to do a typing interview where we ask open-ended questions about all the types so that we get really good data about what's really true for this person, and we don't just go on our initial impressions. And we also need to recognize what the impact is on people of taking tests. Now, sometimes people learn their type and they don't like what they find out, and so how do you deal with that? And how can you help frame and communicate the Enneagram that fosters self-acceptance in people and reduces self-criticism, that helps people open up to understanding themselves more without judgment, but also challenges them? Because Uranio and I come from a mindset that we believe that people need both a lot of support and at moments they need to be challenged, because the ego needs to be confronted because it holds a grip on us. And so sometimes we need to really sort of push a little bit on the ego, but it needs to be done very carefully. And this is part of the skill of understanding how to work with people.
Right. So super happy to see that several people are participating on the chat here on YouTube and asking questions. So I'll just read a question now. I'll answer it and then I'll read another question for you, Bea. Would you say it's okay as a coach to point someone towards a particular type initially if you hear patterns of that type? Two answers to this. If you do that, make sure that you don't nail down type. Make sure that you offer this as a suggestion for the person to validate during self-assessment or not, and be open to learning that you haven't seen the right things at times. Now, to do that, you need to study hard the Enneagram in the correct way. So you need to have the right understanding of each type and subtype. Also sometimes you can say something like, I'm not yet convinced that you're that type. You're perhaps that other type, but you know better. Just do this homework. Now, there's another question, Bea, that I want to ask you. Someone is asking, what did you say about body types needs?
Yeah, remember, I think I just tried to speak to that. In terms of when you're working with a body type, you need to be grounded in your own body. You need to be straightforward. You need to be authentic, because in a way that you're matching the energy that a body types when you're doing that. But anything you would add?
No, I think that's great. And how would you perhaps do a subtype interview?
Well, in our interview script, what we suggest people do is first they ask questions looking for the type, that you kind of go for type first. However, if you know the subtypes really well and you have them in your mind, it can help you differentiating between types, and it can help highlight what two types might look similar. Like self-preservation 6 tends to look like self-preservation 2. And so if you have that in your mind, if a person is answering in a way where they could be 2 or 6, you kind of know that, and that can steer your thinking. However, what we like to suggest is after you help the person find their type, then you ask some other questions. And sometimes one of the things we offer is some subtype statements, like if someone turns out to be a 3. We have we have a question that can be answered in 3 different ways, and you can use those statements with your client and say, which of these 3 statements rings most true for you or represents your experience most, or how would you rank these 3? And so we're developing more of those as well. So we suggest that you learn the subtypes really well. It'll help you differentiate. It'll help you know what the options are, right? Because some people who have only studied the 9 types and haven't studied our approach, the Naranjo approach to the subtypes, don't know what a self-preservation 4 is. They don't know how a self-preservation 3 differs from a social 3, differs from a 1-to-1 or a sexual 3. So knowing these distinctions will help you start to understand how people answer. For instance, I was, when I do typing interviews with self-preservation 4s, I know some of them, most of us think that most 4s are very emotional, very in touch with their feelings. Some self-preservation 4s say they're not very in touch with their feelings because sometimes in childhood, they got really strong messages about not showing their feelings. And so they learn to suppress them and can even not be as aware of them themselves as they might need to be. So the subtypes give you more fine distinctions, but we usually have people look for type first and then clarify the subtype at least after.
Right. There is a question about tests and the externality that they have, and that sometimes they don't help the client self-accept. So yes, and we always see a test as a beginning of a journey, not an end of a journey. And we both, when we do tests and when we teach practitioners on how to deal with clients, we make sure that we teach people to validate type and not get to a conclusion through a report and as if they were watching TV and just absorbing content from the outside. So there is a big role in self-assessment and in engaging the client in that whole process of investigation. Yeah, and trauma can add a very significant overlay to personality.
Someone's asking that trauma seems to add a significant overlay to the personality type, even displaying a personality type which is not their own, like shifting the way the personality type looks. How does the flow chart help with this? I would say this is something that we would address more in our assessment. And we suggest everyone does an assessment interview as part of, remember, there's the typing and then there's what we're calling assessment, which is assessing what's going on with the person, what is their challenge, what is bringing them to self-development work. And it's good always to ask about a person's background. And it's very true that someone who's had a lot of trauma in their life, it can shift the way their type gets expressed. And it's an important piece of the puzzle. So when you're talking with your client, it's good to identify that. And we talk about ways, both when we talk about the typing interview and also assessment. Early childhood trauma is one of our assessment factors, one of the things that you're looking for to see like what's going on with this person or what do I need to pay attention to determine the absolute best approach with this person. And certainly taking into account the role of trauma is very important. Sometimes it doesn't shift the whole personality type. It just maybe accentuates one defensive pattern more than the others, something that person is more extreme in because they needed to be to survive. Sometimes it can make them look like one of their stress points, one of their arrow line connected points. So again, keeping that in mind. Sometimes it can make them look like their type only one that has more anxiety about a particular thing or a particular kind of situation. So yes, this is one of the things we also talk about when we do our workshops, when we're training practitioners, because it's so important. And the great thing about what's happening now in the world is that I think people are becoming more aware of the role of trauma and that we all need healing. Most of us have had some sort of trauma in our background, and that is an important piece of the picture.
And I think this was one of the main themes we studied this year, and we presented at the Enneagram Global Conference on Enneagram and trauma. And we also recorded the podcast on this. So check it out. Our podcast is called Enneagram 2.0, and a recent episode was on trauma and the Enneagram.
Mhm. And I want to say one more thing about the case studies that we use to teach about how to do assessment. And that is that Uranio and I create fictional stories about fictional characters that like a client named Joe that walks into your office, and usually based on people we've actually known or worked with. And we kind of tell the story of that person. And we say, okay, if you were this person's coach, how would you answer some of these questions? How would you, and then we have a series of questions to be answered. And one of the things that happened kind of organically in our workshops is people asked if they could work on those in small groups. So after a workshop, if people want to do more case studies, we work in small groups in the workshop. But after the workshop, when people who are getting certified by us as a high quality Enneagram practitioner, they also work in groups to talk through these case studies and talk about different aspects of them and what assessment factors might be the most important to consider.
Excellent. I'm missing Teresa already. What do you think? Is this a good time?
Yes, I think this is a great time to bring on our good friend Teresa, someone who we really appreciate a lot because she stayed in touch with us and let us know how the methods that she worked with at the course have helped her and how she has been using them in her work. So we thought you would enjoy meeting her also. Hi, Teresa. Welcome.
Hi, Teresa. You're on mute, huh? Okay.
Long time no see.
We just saw Teresa in our mistyping course last weekend. So it's so good to see you again.
I'm so happy to be with you anytime I can be. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. I think it's going to be really, really helpful for people to hear an individual story about how you've developed as a practitioner using the Enneagram and how you've put the methods to work that we offer in our courses. But first, I think it would be nice for people to hear a little bit about your background, about what you do and as a practitioner and how you use the Enneagram.
Yeah, so I have a couple of job titles. I'm a pastor of a recovery church in Richmond, Virginia, whose sole purpose, we created it 23 years ago. Our sole purpose really was to try to, for people who wanted it, to wed a quest for spirituality with their recovery experience. In 1999, there was a bit more separation in mutual aid societies from that. And so we saw a gap that helps nonprofits serve people in recovery and with mental health issues better. And so that's what I do. And then about 15 years ago, we actually, what happened is we accidentally created a church. Okay. So we started out this thing that was going to be an 8-week pilot project. And then 8 years later, people said, you've got to stop calling it that. And what had happened is we had expected people to come and go. But what happened is many people came and stayed. And so, I don't know, 5-8 years in, I had a dilemma because how were we going to grow people past their initial crisis and their recovery journey? So you're now 3 to 5 years into recovery. You've got an established community, 12 steps we value and respect tremendously. We've hooked people up with therapists, all this good stuff's going on. But how can we articulate spiritual growth? And so I brought in a therapist to work with us for 2 years every Monday night. And she used the Enneagram as one of the tools. But she didn't know it very well. And I realized that as I was sort of doing what sixes do and was fact checking, right? So my girlfriend and I went that next summer on a find an Enneagram expert journey. We literally took a road trip. We went and studied with Rizzo and Hudson. And then we went down to Dallas and did some studying with someone else. And I became absolutely convinced that the Enneagram as a map was what I needed in our community. I mean, like it was everything. But the problem was I kept in my material work, I kept coming to cliffs where the map stopped. And I, as a 6, certainly didn't have the confidence or the competency, quite objectively, this was true, to go on my own into this wilderness. And we came, my friend and I, and her daughter-in-law, came to your Norfolk workshop. That was the first experience we had. And I was like, this is it. I mean, because you introduced us to subtypes. And I had this nagging feeling for all these years that there had to be more specificity in order for there to be a spiritual growth path that I could articulate in my community. Because what we would hear was general things like silence and solitude and yeah, I got that. Now, what else? Because how are we going to move from awareness, from passion and fixation, and stop talking about this like this is just a cocktail party game, to really moving up now I didn't have these words then. I have them from you now. How can we support people as they move up their levels of awareness? And so, is that what you needed?
Yeah, that's really, really beautiful, Teresa, really clear. And so it sounds like people would come to you when they decided to do recovery work from addiction, et cetera. And then your program worked so well that you wanted to support people after that. Like that's often for people a really important opening to the personal growth journey, both psychological and spiritual. So it sounds like you were looking for a really robust tool to help you support people in effective ways in their growth journey after, like, sort of during and post recovery.
Yes, and I needed a tool, and I was really clear in my mind on this. I needed a tool, and this is where the interview flowchart comes in. I needed a way to help people with more, I guess, integrity find their typology, because I was seeing what I believed was a lot of mistyping. Mm-hmm. And, this is a tool of self-awareness. And if, I've got somebody that's 3 months sober, and I know that organically 5 major functions of their brain are not working, and they're stuck down in their limbic system. Mm-hmm. And I felt like the Enneagram addressed that. Mm-hmm. But they got really frustrated if I put them in a 12-week course to help them figure out what their number was. This just wasn't working for me. So when I saw the interview flowchart, heaven. because in it, okay, for me, it sometimes takes 75 minutes. But I counterbalance that with it only takes me 20 minutes with 8s. Okay. So my average is pretty good.
Yes.
But I'm like, then I can send them off with a hypothesis to do some of their work.
Yes.
And that is brilliant. I mean, and I'm like, and you guys know me, I'm not particularly confident person, but I feel competent and confident when doing the interviews, as long as I stay in the trust the process mindset.
Yes, which is one of the things we suggest, because of course, all of us, when we're doing a typing interview, we have some nervousness. I feel this still of like, am I going to find the type? Is it going to be clear? And there are different aspects to the interview. And one of them is trusting the process and allowing yourself to have some faith in in asking a regular script of questions, because if you ask the same questions over time, you start hearing the way certain types answer, and even the language they use, or when you ask them a question, they don't know what you're talking about. All of it is data. So one of the things I like about what you did is, now, how many interviews have you done now based on this typing method of the script and the flow chart?
I'm a little embarrassed. I think I'm in the 250s.
Wow, 250. I knew it was more than I was saying it was. Wow.
Yeah, well, I do a lot a week. I mean, I really, a couple of reasons. I love doing them. People are willing to let me do them. And I really consider this a science experiment, and I'm trying to collect good data on it to see what I'm learning.
But it's also very, very engaging for the person in a way that not only the result, this is probably your type, but also the process with the questions is also a reach for the person, isn't it?
Yes, and people are not resistant.
Mm-hmm.
Now, okay, we can be frank here. 8s sometimes get impatient. So like that, I'll be answering a series of questions like, well, tell me about your relationship with emotions. Do you have a wide range of emotions? And they'll say, I don't care what number you're on here, just skip these questions. This is not me. And I'm like, okay, validation, but I still go through the whole process because I think they deserve for me to do that. And I learn stuff, and there is such remarkable consistency with the energy of a type. And I am beginning to be able to get a sense. And I never want to assume that I've got the sense, right? I want to have the data.
Yes.
And the reason for that is, so can I give you an example?
Yes.
So I typed a couple of months ago, I didn't know these folks personally. And the mother turned out to be, I assessed her initially as a sexual 4. She disagreed with my assessment and felt she was a self-preserving 4. And it's her experience. But I wrote on my chart, I'm thinking sexual, but she thought self-preserving, but I don't really know her, and I sent her off to listen to your panels on YouTube. And then I did her daughter, and her daughter was a 6. And I assessed her daughter as a self-preserving 6. And her mother disagreed with me and thought she was a social 6. So I got an email from her mother explaining to me how wrong I was. And this is why, and I want to really communicate this so enthusiastically. My personal work that I've done with you guys is as or more valuable than anything else I've done. Because it really matters. You've got to pay attention to your own stuff. So, 6s are reactionary. I'm a social 6. And I got that first email and I was like, I think I'm going to have a reaction to this. Well, what I was able to do because of my work was to say, wait a minute. These are just hypotheses. So I was able, with all my sincere little heart, to write back and say, you go, girls. We start on this hypothesis. Hell, it took me years to figure out what my subtype sequence was. You're way ahead of me on the curve. You go. And then, of course, the next day, because she carbon copied her daughter on the email, the next day I got this long, sweet, friendly 6 email trying to correct her mother's aggression.
Wow.
And all of it makes sense to me. And none of it do I have to explain to them.
Yes.
Because they're on a journey.
And that
Yeah.
process itself is so rich.
Yeah. And they're doing it. They're doing the work. And it's what more could you ask? And their accuracy at this point seems far, I mean, my goodness, I can't even, you don't have enough time on this webinar for me to say all the ways it took me to get to mine. So why would I think it'd be different for someone else? And the process is rich. And if I'm working on my stuff and learning how to work with all these types, we stay engaged. So they're like, we can't wait till you start your next class. So I teach Enneagram classes on Zoom, started this during the pandemic, and I require an interview for anybody who wants to take a class with me because I want to know who's in there and I want them to know me. And I'm a giant petri dish of experimentation, and I'm wanting to see how my interview experience matches up with my experience in the classroom.
Beautiful.
So I'm just having the best time of my life.
Wow.
Yes, and we've been pushing you to do that more and more professionally, and it seems that you are coming up with your own Enneagram business because
Yes.
you're feeling confident after developing this technique.
Yes, and I spent money on myself and hired a team of people to help me. So my website gets launched in probably in about a month. I'm a little impatient. Seems like they're taking a long time to get it done. But I'm very excited about it. And so I will start out this year with launching the interview and follow-up assessment part of it. And then in January, I'll launch my classes in a more formal way.
Great.
Yeah, I think that very, very few things make us feel as good as this, because we truly have an intention to enable our students to thrive and to spread the word of the Enneagram in the right way. And you're a beautiful example of this. And also, I think that we've been trying to create a model that people don't stay dependent on us. They can go out to the world and explore and do, but hopefully they will stay connected with us in our community. And, keeping learning somehow, but also being independent individuals and practitioners who will help spread the word of the Enneagram in such a moment where it's blooming.
Well, one thing you haven't mentioned on here yet is if you're in the professional track, the use of a mentor. So I, and hear this coming from a 6 in a head type looking for support. I don't even know how you guys, I really sometime want to go to dinner with you two and figure out how you did this. Because your system is so robust in support. So I have, I'm pretty much finished with my professional track certification work, but I've had a mentor that worked with me for 9 sessions, fantastic human. I had a team of people that work with me on the case studies. By the way, I think the case studies are very hard. And the value for me of working with the case studies with a group of people was I wanted to work on myself, and I knew that I would want to perform at my highest level in the case studies. And I knew if I worked at a team that there was going to be a moment where I probably wasn't going to agree. And I wanted the practice of having to be on a team and see where I was with my reactivity. And, so on my team, I'm working with a 2 and a social 9, a self-preserving 2 and a social 9, and then social 6 on our team. And I have loved every minute of it for what it's taught me about me. So your system is incredible. You have your podcast. So I get them as soon as they come in. it keeps me on track, and it gives me the kind of support I need to have the confidence I need to do what you have convinced me I'm capable of doing. I would have never done this if you hadn't had the robust system you have. I'm sure. Yeah.
So I so appreciate everything you're saying. And I want to highlight a couple of things I heard in your description of how you were working with the interview. And I also want to ask you a couple more questions about the interview, because I think, it's so wonderful to have someone who's done 250 of these, right? And so on the one hand, one of the things I heard in what you said, which I really liked, is a balance of allowing people to have the freedom to have their own process and presenting your conclusions as a hypothesis, and not feeling any sense of like, I need to convince them that I'm right or that I know better than they do what type they are, sort of leaving them with good materials and letting them sort of begin their own self-inquiry. But I also heard some confidence in you that I think derives from you having, learned and studied and practiced and made this your own in a way. We often say, we give people the script and the flow chart, but then it's a lot making it your own, but you need something to go on. So you're not going from nothing. But so I love how you balance those two things of humility and a confidence in your own competence, so that you are confident enough to say, here's my hypothesis. But framing it that way. And that's what I do too. And sometimes I get a little too confident about my hypothesis because sometimes I can be wrong, but I'm very open because I still do typing interviews. I love doing typing interviews. I just got an email the other day from someone who said, I'm not sure I'm the type that you said I was at the end. And so it gives me a great opportunity to write back and say, it was just a hypothesis, and to be able to say, here's what I heard from you that makes me think that you might be that type and subtype. And, either I'm incorrect, my hypothesis was incorrect, and here are some other possibilities you might consider, or my hypothesis is correct, but it's not landing or it's not making sense yet for these reasons. So it enables me to go back and do that. And again, I think it's always this balance. Now, I want to ask you, what are some of the lessons you learned about maybe the Enneagram, working with the types, working with the system through doing so many of these interviews?
Gosh, where to even start? Well, I think I already said, trust the process. Mm-hmm. The other thing, this is fascinating to me. So I've gotten a lot of people who have come to me who are Enneagram guru-y type people in our state, who have been working with, in various ways, a lot of times through their churches, with the Enneagram for a really long time. And it was my observation that it seemed like getting them, I was finding a ton of mistyping. My numbers were 40% of these folks that were super experienced in the Enneagram were mistyped because they didn't have subtype. So one of the things that has become really helpful is to be able to explain to them about countertypes. So knowing the sequencing and having the descriptions of the different countertypes and being able to offer that as an alternative explanation, which is upsetting to people. People cry. Wow. They'll say, well, I thought, so one of my favorite ladies, she said, I thought I was a 3 and I've been doing development work for 3s for 20 years. And she turned out to be a social 9. And when I went there, she was very resistant. And I had to be very careful to pull back and go with, so you've made this point before, you've got to, what can people tolerate? But over time, that resistance came down. I think if I had pushed her as a social 9, she would, on principle, have to stay a 3 the rest of her life, right? because she's a social 9. And, so you can't, that would be rude and inconsiderate to tell her that, but she's so excited about that. So I think countertype is a thing that I've learned. And and we saw that this weekend in the mistyping workshop, which was so fantastic. There are a lot of surprising lookalikes.
Mm-hmm.
So what I have been so amazed at is how many people that typed as 4s have sevens have turned out to be self-preserving 4s.
Yes.
There are so many stereotypes. I can get reactive about
Me too.
2s always being helpful. Where did that even come from?
Welcome to my world.
Oh, I know. Or 4s, you can know a 4's in your class if they wear a scarf around their neck. This just drives me crazy. So, I've learned a lot about how this is complicated, and it makes it more interesting for me, knowing that. I've learned that there are very common communication and nonverbal type patterns, and I am getting much more sensitive to that. And on the interview flow chart, as you all know, you have those written. And so in the middle of an interview, if I start observing something like somebody telling me to skip questions, right? Or somebody like, well, why are you asking me that? Or, well, what is the point of that? Kind of questioning or disconnecting from the interview. There are cues and clues. I guess eventually, no, this wouldn't have happened because I would have never done this. But I was going to say eventually, maybe I would have figured it out. I don't think that's true. I think that having the sheet in front of me is just such a helpful guide. And it doesn't guarantee, but it certainly helps. I've also learned that, and I hear you say this, and when you say it, I always hope everybody's getting it. It's almost like the follow-up question is more important than the initial question.
Yes.
So when you ask somebody, for example, do you have an inner critic? Most people that I've interviewed say yes, but that's not true when you ask the follow-up question. A lot of times it's confusion between whether somebody has an inner critic or whether they have self-doubt, for example. So it's you have to be a really good listener, and sometimes it's the way they say it or the little side comments they toss out. That are really important because people say via subtype say amazingly consistent things. The other thing that I've learned that took me a while to catch onto is the instincts are instinctual. And so people are not very able to just like, if I just describe instincts to them, that doesn't mean they understand it. So it's so much better,
right,
to like nail down the description of the subtype,
right,
than it is to assume that if I give them a 5-minute dissertation on the sequencing and what's the difference between a sexual and a self-preservation subtype, that they're going to be able to do much with that. They're not able to do much with that, which is why the questions on the back sheet of the chart are really helpful in differentiating.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said all that. That accords exactly with my own experience. And I think you're pointing to some really important things that we learn when we go into this process. I think we have a couple of questions. Maybe we all three could answer a couple of questions before the end. So someone says, I was recently doing an interview and it was unclear if the person was a social 7 or a type 2. What questions might you ask to differentiate between these?
Well, a few possibilities. I usually ask this. you certainly have a tendency to be there for people and to help. But what happens with that tendency when the person is okay?
Mhm.
If the person is okay already, do you keep having the tendency to keep helping, or are you satisfied and then you focus on someone else or on you or on life, which would be the 7, right?
Right.
It's like social 7s want to take the pain of everybody out of their vision field. And if they do that, they don't have that need to keep going and helping while choose to.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing I would say is how easy is it for you to know what you need and know what you want? Because I think 7s, even social 7s, have access to that much easier. What they usually know what they need and want, but they go against it sometimes. They sacrifice that to support others, as the counter type 7. But 2s often don't know what they need or want. And again, when I was just asking someone that the other day, and they said, "Oh no, I kind of know what I need," and I was thinking they might be a 2, and I said, "Well, has it always been that way?" And so the follow-up question, she said, "Oh no, that's something I've had to work on." So these are things to keep in mind. Someone's saying, as a 4, I feel really drawn to the Enneagram and can also, depending on how I'm holding it, feel so devastated by my patterns and hopeless about changing. I think this is a really important comment because we all feel like that sometimes. And the nature of personality is it's deeply rooted and it is kind of hard to change, which is why we need such good Enneagram practitioners. And one of the things I might say to you, if you were a 4 and you're my client, is the good news is your growth path is all about owning what's great about you, And I know it can be really hard, but I think what we're there to do as practitioners, once we understand someone's Enneagram type and subtype, is we understand exactly what the barriers are to change. So for 4s, there's kind of a way that they unconsciously stay kind of attached to their beliefs about themselves, that they're not good enough, or that it's too hard to change, or that they'll never be good enough. And again, the Enneagram teaches us that there's an individual path. There's something different you would say depending on what the type is. But a lot of it for 4s, when you work with a 4, is encouraging them to really own what's positive about themselves and see what happens, and the great thing about the Enneagram is it focuses you like a laser beam on a few specific things those people can focus on when they're trying to grow. And then, of course, as a practitioner, it's a lot about offering support. As we said before, we advocate support plus challenge, like both at different moments. This is someone who might need a lot of support, to point out, to mirror back all the positive strengths they have that may allow them to change. But also, empathizing with the fact that it's normal to feel hopeless sometimes because it's hard to change. So someone's asking, you say that type is something you're born with. How does that work with childhood experiences being important? What would you say?
Cut off for me. Sorry.
We say that type is something we're born with. That's what we believe. How does that work with childhood experiences being important also?
So it's always nature plus nurture, not either or. But it's not that childhood experiences define what type the person is. It's more like they consolidate the type. That type gets rooted, and personality gets fixated, as it should, according to childhood experiences, but not only in childhood, as we grow. So a lot has been reviewed in this kind of theory in the last 10 or 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And there's another question here. I'm considering advanced, and this might be a good segue. So maybe we can thank Teresa and let her go. But before you go, Any last tips you want to give for anyone who's going on a journey like you've come a long way on so far of learning to integrate the Enneagram into the work they do? Any tips you would give them or key learnings?
Because sometimes, Teresa, people think it's too hard, or or others think that they don't need it. So a hint.
Well, everybody needs it. And I will be hard pressed to think that anybody could find such concrete advice and support for how you can help people with levels of awareness and also a spiritual growth path in terms of suggestions, questions, observations, and things to actually do. Nobody else is doing that the way you're doing it, in a way that makes it possible for us. And that's just a fact. And the other thing I would say is take action. I knew this was the right thing to do, but I hesitated. I felt inadequate, blah, 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 all my stuff. But if you trust the process in every single one of these areas, you are going to be so thrilled with what you can do in terms of being supportive and helpful of others. And you don't want to, there's just no need to hesitate. So just dive in, do the personal or take a class or do, you guys make it easy, however we pop in, to flow into other things. And at whatever level you can tolerate, do it. It would be my suggestion, because it's really quite magical, and it is complete. I will tell you what my family would say about this. My family would say that I have never been happier. And that that I've been in this field for decades, because I'm really old, but I have never loved my work as much as I do now. And I think it's I think that's the thing that my family appreciates the most, as do I.
So I think we've just seen a very brave Six, increasingly fearless, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. Thanks for all the work you're doing and for being such a valued member of our community.
It's my privilege and pleasure. Y'all have a great rest of your webinar.
All right. Thank you, Teresa. Okay. Any comments you want to make at this point, Uranio, or should we share a little bit more about our programs, our workshops, and our professional certification?
I think we can do that. And Jane was asking about the differences between the two workshops. So I think we could say a bit about that. So we call retreats our courses for inner work and self-development. And we call workshops our more professional trainings, aiming to help current and future Enneagram practitioners use the Enneagram competently. And we have two workshops in our professional track, which is the second one. Just want to say that these two workshops plus Retreat A from the personal mastery track constitute the main parts of our Chestnut Pie certification program. And when people certify with us, they even come to our website showing as professional certified students. And also they can even post some of their courses on one part of the website. And it's super important to be in touch with other practitioners, to learn and grow. And we build that community with study groups and teamwork. And also people get a coach who help the practitioner go through that certification journey. It's important to say, Bea, that We are ICF accredited, so people who are coaches and can get CUs when doing our skills workshop, and soon, hopefully, the solutions workshop. And yeah, so it's open for everybody, any kind of leader. Actually, it's not only for therapists and coaches. We get HR people or team leaders, and also people who don't even plan to work professionally with the Enneagram, but they love it so much that they share it informally with friends and family. And also they might in the future think of doing something more professional.
And our what we call our solutions workshop, our providing effective Enneagram solutions workshop, is one where we focus more on typing and assessment, our typing method, the whole assessment process we talked about, and then our developing powerful Enneagram skills workshop is the professional workshop, where we kind of do a deep dive on how to work with different people of different centers, types, subtypes, instinctual sequences. So it's really more focusing on, okay, how do you work with the person? And then the other one is, how do you help guide someone to their type and start figuring out what part of the Enneagram model to apply to where the person is and what they need. So those are the two. Now, the two workshops plus our first inner work retreat are the three sort of workshop components of the professional certification. And then there's the integration work, the case studies, client reports that you do under the supervision of a mentor, coach, in between. And so it's all of that work together that make up the professional certification. Now, our personal mastery program is different, and that's the three inner work retreats. Retreat A, which we call Enneagram 2.0, Retreat B, which we call the transformational Enneagram, and Retreat C, which we call the alchemical Enneagram. Those are more where we do more personal, deeper work with people, and those can be quite deep. If you're interested in really applying the Enneagram in your own personal process, those would be the ones for you. Now, we do require Retreat A as part of the professional certification. And that goes to what Teresa said about how it's really all about doing our own work. We're only as good an Enneagram practitioner often as the level of work we've done on ourselves. So recognizing it's always about self-awareness. It's always really important to make that the top priority. And that part of being a good practitioner is being very aware of your own stuff, both so it doesn't get in the way of the other person, and so you're using that as part of your training ground for what it means to be on a personal growth journey.
Right. Yeah. Just want to say that on the video description on YouTube, where you are right now, you have the links to more information about each workshop, dates, prices. And so if it's not showing for you, all you need to do is to refresh the page. And in there, you will find a coupon for a very interesting discounts. It's $200 for one of the workshops or $500 for both workshops. And this is valid only for 48 hours from right now, from this event that we are doing now.
We do have an online skills workshop coming up and an online solutions workshop coming up. And we used to do these only in person. Now we're doing them mostly online, although we may do them again. And our developing powerful Enneagram skills workshop, the one where we talk about how to work with the centers, types, and subtypes, traps for the coaches, do's and don'ts. That's coming up September 24th to 28th. And our solutions workshop, which is more about typing and assessment, is coming up October 27th to 31st. So those are coming up soon. We try to do both of those 2 or 3 times a year. Next year, we'll be doing them in London in May, one of them. So look at stay tuned to our website, because we do them mostly online now, the professional workshops. We may be doing a few in person, And we do them mainly when we do them in person in California and London.
Right. Yeah. And on top of all that, we have other pre-recorded workshops, shorter, like not as many hours, that are thematic, like they are specific for different things. So we have one on parenting, one on instincts and subtypes. We have a master class that addresses what is the most important thing for each of the 9 types. We have one on love languages and the Enneagram, and we've just recorded one on mistyping.
Yeah, and we're getting a lot of questions about how do you tell the difference between this type and this type? What differentiating questions would you ask between this type and this type? And we actually love helping people differentiate between types. So do check out the mistyping workshop, because what we did is not only did we talk about how to differentiate, but we had people of the different types on differentiating panels talking about how they differ on specific things. So there was a long list of differentiating questions they'll get from the mistyping, 3 full days on mistyping and how to differentiate between types that can look alike. And as Teresa said, it's surprising how many can look alike.
So just want to say, we finished this mistyping workshop 3 days ago, and this means that it's not yet available in the pre-recorded format, but it will be very soon. Amanda is taking care of editing that, and it will be soon available for interested people on the website.
And if you can't find some information that you need on their website, you can always email us at hello@cpenneagram.com, and one of our amazing staff will get back to you and help you figure out what you need to know. Right. Don't stop your engagement. If you have a question, do get in touch with us.
Right. And finally, I want to say that in our website, we have a membership part of the website with a lot of content of all kinds, both for people interested in inner work and for professionals. And it's a membership platform. It's called CP Online. So check it out in case you have a broader interest on the Enneagram and in an ongoing way. You don't particularly want only one workshop or course, and you don't want to wait and do it in your own pace and order. So we have hundreds of videos with Bea and I in which we talk everything Enneagram.
Right. Webinars. I did a whole series of subtype interviews. I do think that one of the things that sets apart our school and our approach and our teachings from some of the others is how deeply we go into subtypes. And this approach to the subtypes, these descriptions of the characteristics of the subtypes and their growth paths, didn't come from us. It's from Claudio Naranjo, who gave us the really robust descriptions of the 9 types in the first place. So in my view, and I started out as an academic, he is one of the most authoritative authors and teachers in defining the type and subtype elements of the system. And so we find the subtypes as he defined them in what I call the modern era. I learned them in 2004. I had been sort of studying the Enneagram for 14 years before that, and had never found the subtypes very compelling or interesting or helpful in my growth path. But when I learned his approach to 2004, and his staff helped me see that I was a self-preservation 2 and how that was different than just being a 2. And it added a whole new level of understanding to my own journey and my own development. So I do want to emphasize that is something that I think, and we get a lot of feedback about, that adds a level of nuance and specificity, and thus, a greater capacity for the Enneagram to be a powerful tool in your own work and the work that you do with others. So I do want to highlight that. And if you become a member of CP Online, you can see subtype video interviews with 2 people of each subtype. And so it's kind of nice to be able to see, okay, 2 ones, 2 social ones, 2 self-preservation ones, 2 sexual ones, and hear them telling a slightly different story about how they experience the world. So there's a lot on there, and we invite you to become a part of our community. We're hoping to add a forum to our online membership platform very soon, so people can have discussions and comment on different things and talk, because I think with the Enneagram, it started off as an oral tradition, so it comes alive when we can talk about it in community with each other.
Great, Bea.
Well, one more thing. I want to thank everyone for being here with us, and also remind you that we have a new book coming out that we're very excited about. It comes out on October 1st. It's called The Enneagram Guide to Waking Up, because this is all about waking up. And the subtitle is one I like a lot. It's Find Your Path, Face Your Shadow, Discover Your True Self. And so in each type chapter, we spell out kind of a 3-step growth path for each of the types. So we don't spend too much time describing the types. There's a part in the beginning where you can sort of help see if you're that type, but then it's a lot about, okay, now when I know my type, what do I do with that information? And it's a lot of very practical ideas about what to do at each stage of your journey, and thinking of it in 3 steps. Like, first, I need to just become more aware of my patterns, and I need to start seeing how I do my type thing all the time without realizing it. And then the second step is about facing the shadow, seeing more of your blind spots, recognizing more of the unconscious patterns and habits that you have that you maybe have avoided seeing in yourself, and how to become more conscious with a lot of self-compassion. And then the third step, how to kind of aspire and move toward the higher side that is inherent in all of us, that is inherent in all of our personality types, that it's the personality can be a vehicle or a jumping off point in order to become really who you are, all of who you are, because your personality is not all of who you are. It's not who you are at all.
I want to thank everybody who followed live. Also, if you're watching this video later on, you're welcome to CP Enneagram Academy, and hope to see you there soon in one of our courses.
Yes, thank you for listening. Thank you for your attention, and best wishes on your journey.